In this video, I'm going to be going over the basics of the effect line editor and the effects pool in MA2. The software is the same on PC as it is on the console, so you can follow along if you download the show file down in the description that I've provided, and make sure you're running the latest software in order to open this file. In this particular video, I'm using software version 3.3.4.3, but you can use any streaming version 3.3.4, if that makes sense. I'll talk about streaming versions in a different video, but let's get into talking about effects. If I take a look at my template show file here that I've provided, we'll go into the fixture and patch schedule, and we can see we have two fixture types patched. 16 BMFLs, bright multifunction luminaires, not anything else, and a couple of color force 72s. This is just to show you what a few different types of fixtures behave like with the effects engine. And on my screen number 2 here, my command screen, you can see I have a group pool, an effect pool, a position preset pool, and a color pool. Let's start by playing around with an attribute that nearly every fixture has, dimmer or intensity. Before we even get into the effect editor, we can just grab our fixtures by selecting group 1, BMFLs. We can go to our preset type dimmer, and we can add an effect layer to our programmer. We're currently in the programmer. There's no cues stored in this show. We're all in the programmer. And what we can do, if we open up this special dialog box, we can see this is kind of like a dumbed down version of the effect line editor, which I'll show you in a second. And in here, in the effect layer, we can add a different form. So if we want to add a sine wave, we can see all of our fixtures start pulsing on and off with a sine wave. And we can see next to that, we have both a low value and a high value that we can put in. Right now it's default to 0 as a low and 100 as a high. And even from within this special dialog box for the effect layer, you can store these to an effect pool. And now when you call this effect, it'll go just as it was in the programmer. So this is one way to make effects, but I prefer to do it slightly differently. With effects, you have 4 options that you can have, and you can have one or the other of both sets, if that makes sense. So our 4 different types are selective, template, absolute, and relative. But those two are grouped into pairs. So you can choose to either have it as a template effect or a selective effect, and you can either have it as a relative effect or an absolute effect. It may sound a little confusing, but it'll make sense once we get into the effect line editor. So let me show you how I would create, basically a dimmer effect for these BMFLs. So let's go ahead and right click on effect number 1 to create a blank effect. This is going to create a template effect unless you have something selected in your programmer. So I have nothing right now, there's no fixtures selected, and I'm going to go to add. And within this effect attribute menu, you can see every attribute that is in existence in your patch. So if you have a fixture that only has dimmers in your patch, you're only going to see dimmer in here. But since I patched a moving head, there's quite a few more features. So let's go ahead and select dimmer, and we'll hit confirm. And this opens up an effect line. Each one of these lines is one cycle of the effect. So keep in mind, any attributes that you put into this effect line are all going to start at the same time, and they will all continue along the full time of the effect. And I'm going to switch this over to our second screen so we can see it a little more clearly. So we can see here we have our effect line editor. Each one of these lines is per attribute. You can only have one attribute per line or per effect, if that makes sense. And within this handy dandy spreadsheet, we have all sorts of options we can play with. And all of these can be right-clicked or edit-clicked to modify their contents. So let's just go through these one by one. Over in the quantity field, this will indicate whether or not your effect is a template or a selective effect. And since I created this effect with no fixtures selected, we have a big old fat none in the quantity cell here. And if we go over to interleave, this is just like your MA2 interleave, pretty self-explanatory. You can choose whether you want none, which is usually how I end up doing these, or you can choose 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, etc. So if you only want the odd fixtures of your selection to do this effect, then you select the odd, but I usually want all my fixtures to be doing this. Attribute, this is what we just went through in the other menu. And then mode, this is the difference between absolute and relative. So you just right click to switch the modes. Relative means that the effect will be centered around whatever value that attribute is currently at. So for example, if I have a position where a fixture is pointed at a singer or a DJ on stage, something like that, and I want to create a circle that goes around them, a relative effect will work best because you can point your light at a single position and then the effect will move around that position. Absolute is if you want to go between two hard values, and absolute is nice because you can also reference presets over in the low and the high values. We'll talk about that in a second. So I'm going to switch to relative right now, and because I'm going to be doing a dimmer effect that I'm used to making. And then next we have the form. The form is any of the stock forms, or you can generate your own waveforms as well and save them to be used in the effect editor. But it's, you know, basically you'll be using these basic ones for the most part. Right now I have sine because I want to have a smooth ramp of a dimmer effect. And up next we have rate and speed. So if we assign a speed group here, this will kind of be overwritten by everything, or the speed section will. The rate you can change in relativity to all the other fixture types that you're using that are also linked to that speed master. So right now I have speed group 1, and we'll just start with 0.25. And what I'll actually do, I'll just create a speed master so we can play around with it by right clicking, or actually left clicking on an empty executor to assign it as a special master, speed master 3.1. So now you can see if we play with this speed master, the speed changes, but the rate doesn't change. So if you want to be following along a BPM and have the dimmer effect hit every like 4 beats, then you would put in a 0.25 here, which is usually what I end up doing. So moving right along, we'll go over to the direction value. And you have 4 options here. You have forward, forward bounce, backward bounce. I'm just going to do forward right now. We'll do an example of backward bounce maybe later. And then we have our low value and our high value. This is referencing the natural values in the fixture type editor. So if I bounce over to our patch and fixture schedule, and we go to the dimmer attribute of the BMFLs, we'll scroll down here to dimmer, dimmer, where are you? There you are, last one. That's kind of interesting. We go to edit row, and you can see in the dimmer attribute, we have these natural values here. So these are kind of how you think of the light working in the real world. So you don't say, hey, can I put the light at 255 bits of DMX? You say, can I put that light at full, or put the light at 100? So the MA is referencing normal values, or things that you experience in the natural world, and converts them to DMX further down the chain. So we have a 0 to 100 range in the dimmer attribute, and that's referenced directly in this low and high value. So if we were to set this to 20 and then run the effect would go from 0 up to 20 and back down. It would never go above that. Phase, this is interesting, and this will basically dictate at what point in the waveform of the sine wave that your effect will start on. So if we're starting at 0, then the sine wave, let's see if I can actually remember, it starts at what, the middle point. Yeah, so it'll start at 50% of the way through, so it would start at 50% and then go up to 100, back down to 0, back up to 50, and then continue the next cycle. And then within here, you can use through as a way to spread the phase across a range of fixtures. Even though we have nothing selected for our template effect here, we can still type in something like 0 through 360. And that means that the effect will automatically split up those values along the full range of fixtures you've selected. And then width dictates how wide the waveform is. This is important for things like pulse width modifier when you want to create like really quick staccato type movements or dimmer chases, things like that. But right now with the sine wave, we'll use the width of 100. And then one thing I also like to do with the sine wave to make it look a little more, I don't know, just a little more dynamic, I usually change the low value to something like -40. And then the high value to 100. And then over in here, we've got groups. Groups will split up your selection into different numbers of groups, right? So if I have, for example, 24 fixtures on a truss, and I want that cycle of the waveform to be duplicated multiple times, I could do a group of 12, and then each group of 12 fixtures will have that same cycle going along them. In this particular instance, I'm going to do groups of none. And then I'll show you an example where we do groups a little later. Blocks is pairings of fixtures next to each other that act the same, right? So if I do a block of 2, every group of 2 fixtures is going to increase and decrease at the same amount, at the same time. And then wings, this is my favorite one. I almost always do wings of 2 on every selection, except for really cool like whole rig wipes, left, right, things like that. So we've created this effect, which is a pretty generic one that you can even find in the predefined section. But I wanted to show you how to build one from scratch here. We'll go in and we'll go to my layout view here. And I'm going to make a selection. I'm just going to show you what it would look like if I created a normal selection. So if I just grabbed all these fixtures, just drag my finger across the screen on the MA, and then I click on this template effect to apply it, you can see we have something interesting going on here, but it doesn't really resemble much of anything like you may have seen in the shows that we do. Reason for that is we do what's called a symmetrical selection before we apply these things. So if I go into my layout view here and I create a selection that kind of follows a path through the fixtures, starting at the center, and then I, let's say, store that as a new group, and we'll call that BMFL Sim, and then I apply that effect, you can see we have a much different looking effect. It looks a little better. It looks a little bit like how my shows look, doesn't it? So now from here, we're still running a template effect, and before I store this anywhere, if I like how this looks, what I'm going to do is I'm going to store it as its own selective effect. So since we have the selection running, since the effect has been called, if I store it to a pool, then to an effect pool, then it will become a selective effect. So now I can call that selective effect. It'll remember the selection and start outputting the effect. That's pretty cool, huh? So I'm going to rename that as BMFL Sim Sine. Very descriptive. And now I can store that with an executor. So we'll just store that to 201 here. And now I can like assign it as a toggle switch. So we'll do assign temp makes toggle, and then click on our executor. And now when we click that on and off, we can see our effect is running. Genius. So cool. So unbelievably cool. And now I can use that same effect, that template effect, on a color force selection. So you can see I have my color forces here. And if I just do that same thing where I make a symmetrical selection, like that, and we'll do CF Sim. We apply that template, and look at that. They're running. And then I can store that as CF72 Sim Sine. Then if I call that and then store that, now we have two toggle buttons that are running effects. Pretty sweet. Now let's see if we want to get a little more complex. For example, let's take our color forces and let's store a couple of color presets. We'll go red, whoops, not there. Store that in our color preset. We'll go red, and we'll go to like a nice dark blue. Now if we take our CF Sim selection, right click on an effect, and we will jump on over into the effect editor. We'll do add, and we'll change our effect attribute to mix color. And this will import 4 lines with our selection already selected, 96 cells of those 12 cell color forces. Now from here, we can do things like change the form to pulse width. Say if I want this to be like a police light type thing, like flashing back and forth between red and green, or red and blue, excuse me. What I'll do is I'll make sure our mode is in absolute. Make sure we have all of our color attributes selected. Make our form pulse width and our width 50. So there's a nice even, odd flashing. Change our speed group to, I'll just do speed 1 again. And then our rate to like 0.5. And then we'll change our blocks to 6. Since each one of those fixtures has 12 cells in it. That's the reason why I'm doing that. And I'm going to change our wings to 2. Everything else looks good in here, except for our low and high value. So I'm going to highlight all of our low values. And in this pop-up, if you have selective effect, if you have it as a selective effect, and you have a preset in those lines that apply to the fixtures that you've selected, you will see this pop up with different presets that you can reference. So go red, blue. So now, if I call this effect, we'll go over to layout view so we can actually see it. Put these fixtures at full. You'll see we have a very nice effect running on all these fixtures. Now let's say I wanted to make it like bounce or do something interesting. We can always go back into our effect editor and do something like, oh, we'll do groups of 2. And now you can see we have this nice, cool, even odd looking effect. And we can speed this up, slow this down with our speed group, or with our speed master, excuse me. Double speed, quad speed, 900 BPM. Can you feel it? Okay. And we can store that to another executor as well. And assign that as a toggle. So now we have all these different things. And if we add these on top of each other, we can have that, it's hard to see on the layout view because it just kind of dulls the color. It doesn't really dim all the way out. But that effect is running both the color effect and the dimmer effect at the same time. And you can even combine these. So if we wanted to have that color force dimmer and the color force color in the same effect, what we could do is we could just call one of these and call the other one by clicking on them, double clicking on them, and then storing to a new effect. So now we'll clear everything out, toggle everything off, and when we call this, we have the effects both running in one effect line. How fascinating. And if you can see this like red highlighted thing, this means there's individual values in here that are not in line with this range, which is fine for this instance, but not fine in others. I'll show you an example. Let's go into something like movements. And we'll take our BMFLs, we'll put them at full for now. And we'll give them just a bit of a position. We'll just tilt them out a little bit. And we'll store that as position 1. We'll do a position 2. I'll type in 40 here. And then I think, yep, and then we'll do a cone position. I did that by hitting follow offset here. And then you can click anywhere in the 3D world, as long as it's on an object, like the 3D plane that I'm clicking on right now. And you can store that as a position as well. So I'll just name these real quick. We'll go, this is straight. This is stage right, stage left, center. All right, so let's create a movement effect with these BMFLs. We're going to select our BMFL Sine. I'm going to right click on an empty effect. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and go load predefined. And we'll go pan tilt circle. Speed group 1. Rate of 0.1 because we don't want our movement to be quite as fast as all the other effects that are running through here. And then I usually like to change -45 and +45 on my pan tilt because that gives me a range of 90 degrees left to right and 90 degrees top to bottom. That's the most you would probably ever see any moving light, even on an EDM stage, going. And then, I won't show you this trick yet. I'll show you that in a second. So if we go ahead, do our BMFL Sine at full, and then in our straight position, I'll store this to a Q. This is going to be BMFL on and then I apply this pan tilt circle. You can see all of the fixtures start doing this cool little circle. But it doesn't really look like what you guys are used to seeing on my channel. One other thing we can do here, we'll go over, since we've called this, go over to executor 2, we'll store this, and I'm going to change this fader to a temp fader. So this means that now that I've cleared out the programmer, nothing's running the programmer, the more I bring up this fader, the larger the circle is going to get on the effect. And the reason why I leave this as a selective effect and I don't use a template effect is because if I go into any selective effect and edit it, those changes are populated throughout the whole show file anywhere you've used that selective effect. So now if I right click and we say change the groups to 2, all of our groups have changed to 2 and now they're working in like an even odd sort of manner. And this is the fun part, this is the magic that everybody always asks me about. And since you've watched this video this far, I'm going to show you. If you do pan wings -2 and then tilt wings +2, you get this very symmetric, cool looking movement. If I can get it squared away here. So this is how you make that like really cool looking symmetric movement thing. And then you can also switch the direction in here. So we'll go backward. All these different things. And so now you can kind of see why learning the effect line editor is really important. But we can do even more. Let's make another effect. We'll turn this guy off, or girl, I don't know. And we'll go to, we'll select our BMFLs again. We'll right click on an empty effect tile and we'll just go pan tilt 0.1, whoops, not 31, 0.1. And I'll change this to a ramp. We'll do speed group 1. And then since I made this selective, we can change our low value to stage right and our high value to stage left. And I'll change our phase to 0 so they all move together as one fixture. You can also do that by doing groups 1. That accomplishes the same thing. Phase 0 or phase anything in the same number, or groups of 1. With the exception of if you have wings. No, even with wings it wouldn't do that. So yeah, that's the same thing. So let's apply this. And we can see it's now bouncing back and forth between those two presets that we made. Pretty neat. And we can store that as well to another executor and change that to a temp. And if we clear out, you can see it'll go marginally to those presets proportionally to how far you're pushing the fader. Then you can change the speed, all this stuff. And that's really the basics of the effect line editor. You can get a little more involved. There's also tutorials built into the software. So if you check those out, you may be able to learn a little bit more, but hopefully this gives you a good basic understanding of what the different lines do, how they interact with each other. And honestly, my show file is mostly effects. So if you're looking to be doing a lot of work in EDM, make sure you understand how the effects work, how you store them, the different types, and what the strengths and weaknesses are. And then it really comes down to playing with different effects and layering those lines together and seeing what kind of cool things you can come up with. Because it's, you know, everybody sees a red-blue chase, everybody sees a circle that's going around in counter-rotating fashion, but it really takes a lot of work to find those little subtle cool things by combining things like prism or gobo shake or any other of the multitude of features that are available in the moving lights that we use on these stages to create something that is really dynamic and really eye-catching. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. What? You want to say bye to everybody? Yeah. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thanks for watching.